Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 26. So tonight I'm going to be talking about Wigtown Book Festival and my time there as artist in residence, which was in fact about 9 years ago. Wigtown Book Festival, needless, it goes on, happens every year, this time of year, end of September, beginning of October. A 10-day event, and you get wonderful authors from right across the UK, even around the world, who come to it. It's one of the biggest literary events in Scotland. What's amazing about it, though, is the town of Wigtown, where it happens, is tiny by comparison to what you would expect. In southwest Scotland, I think when the festival isn't happening, the population is something like about 900 people. It's certainly less than 1,000. Excuse me. And yet, this time of year, each year, it doubles or triples in size as people descend from all over the country to come to the book festival. Authors giving their readings and talks, and there's musicians, and there's all sorts of things go on with it. It's quite a major event. And of course, needless to say, with COVID going on, that put an end to the live aspect of turning up and going, buying your tickets and, going and sitting and watching the authors and buying your books and getting them signed. However, they decided to create an online version, which is now currently running. So if you're on Facebook, just type into the thing Wigtown Book Festival after this, obviously. If you're watching this on YouTube, on the recorded version afterwards, then take a look at, look up Wigtown Book Festival, and what you will find is that there's a whole programme going on of live events, being recorded events of authors you know and love, authors you didn't know. There's a massive range of stuff going on, definitely worth checking out. Now, because of my connection with Wigtown from a few years ago, I thought, well, okay, let's tie in this episode with with the event. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Starting off though, just to remind you, we're here now currently Facebook Live. Leave your comments, say hello. I can see a couple of people have already joined in. Stacey, good afternoon from Pennsylvania, cloud and rainy there. And Brian's in. Hi Kim and all watching. Well, welcome Stacey, welcome Brian. And good evening everyone from Maggie, my wife, so that's great. So this is good. Leave your comments, let me know I'm not alone here. For the most part though, I'm going to minimise that screen in a moment because I find I get distracted by going off and looking at the comments rather than actually engaging in what I'm supposed to be talking about. Those who were around last week know that I had a major problem trying to find the comments, which is why I've just had them on just now in the hope of making sure that I actually can see them this time without having to charge about desperately scrambling around, pressing keys and moving my mouse trying to find them. Tonight also I'm going to be looking at, we've got a few people coming in from for the critique section in the second part of it. So within critique we have Stacey is talking about this tree, which she took a photo of and is wondering, she was trying to get a sense of the size of it, wondering what she might be able to do with that. VG has been playing around with taking a photo of a chess set and playing with a reflector as well to try and bounce some light back onto things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Jackie took this photo, in fact actually made a crop of it, and it's one that she always likes, but she says always seems to bomb somehow in the competitions, never gives back the, reaches the levels that she would expect it to, because she's very pleased with it, and so we're going to kind of investigate that. And then I'm also going to be looking at Paul, who sent in this picture out of a place called Sandy Hills, which is not too far from where I live, where he's been trying to capture a particular kind of light and aesthetic, but never feels that he'll this photo doesn't quite do it the way he wanted to, so again is looking for a little bit more input on that. So thank you to them for sending the images through, and we will come back to those later in the program. Now, if you happen to find any of this interesting and useful in particular, then please visit buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can make a small contribution towards these podcasts. It's not compulsory, but it is always very much appreciated. Also, just down the side here, you'll notice various other links to where you can find me online. If you're watching this live on Facebook, you probably already know about me on Facebook, but there's also my Instagram page where you can find me on YouTube. Again, if you're watching the recorded version on YouTube, again, you probably already found me. I also have a Twitter account, which isn't used very often, I have to say. And there's my blog as well. Blog posts tend to go up each week. And so you can find, a whole bunch of various other things there. So, with that lot out of the way, let's return to Wigtown Book Festival. But actually, let's just quickly flip up. Yep, no, that's fine. Okay, so what I want to talk about first of all then is, as I said earlier, Wigtown Book Festival, this wonderful 10-day event in this small town, remote village in the southwest Scotland. Now, essentially, my involvement with it happened back in 2011. A couple of years prior to that, in 2009, I'd applied for, they just set up a new thing called, for an artist in residence. The book festival itself had been running for several years, but I think they also had they'd already had a writer in residence, but they wanted to have an artist in residence. I think they teamed up with Springfling at that moment. Springfling I'm actually going to mention at the end of this and next week in more detail. However, I'll come back to that. I applied for it I just started out in the photography at that point. I was still very much trying to find my feet. I put in an application, didn't get anywhere. Following year, 2010, I started to feel, right, okay, I'd properly, I'd been established for a year. I was, at this point, I'd really established portraiture as with the direction I was going in, and particularly kind of black and white portraiture. Put in my application, didn't get anywhere. At least I didn't think I got anywhere. So come 2011, I thought, I've tried that. Clearly I'm not what they're looking for. However, I then ended up in a conversation with someone who'd been involved in the selection process the previous couple of years. And he said, stick it in again. He said, actually, you'd be surprised. He said, you came a very close second previous year. He said, it's definitely worth putting in again. So, okay then. So I updated the application, put it in, and lo and behold, was actually accepted. Now, my application, or what I decided to do for the Wigtown Book Festival, was I decided that what I would do is take photos of pretty much as many people as I could over the course of the 10-day festival, where I would photograph authors, visitors, and locals. Now, I was to be given a studio space to operate from. So the idea was then, at the end of each day, I would download the photos onto my laptop or gather them all up and then print them out and stick them to the walls of the studio space. And then over the course of the 10 days, the walls would fill up with the pictures. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, first thing I said was no smiles. I just wanted to have people staring directly into the lens, slightly moodily, but certainly no smiles allowed. What I'd started to discover at this point was that photos, portraits in particular, just became so much more interesting when you got rid of smiles. And it's a strange thing because we grow up with the idea of portraits where smile for the camera, say cheese. We know that that's what we're supposed to do. But it's only one expression out of thousands that we can have. And once you get rid of the smile, I think faces can become absolutely fascinating, far more interesting. So I decided, so that was one side to it. But then the other thing I decided to do was to get people to give me the name of a well-loved book. And then when I put these photos all around the walls, I would scribble their name underneath, Paul, Keith, Shirley, whatever. And I would then write next to the name, their well-loved book. And the reason for this was when you look at a portrait and you don't know the person, you are looking for evidence of whether they are friend or foe. It triggers a very primal thing. You see a face you've not come across before. Is this person going to be friendly? Are they going to be helpful? Are they to be ignored because they're not a threat? Or are they a threat? And, therefore we've got to watch out for them. And we've evolved over millions of years to immediately start thinking along these terms. Whether we want to consciously or not, our brain starts making these kind of judgments. And we form opinions. Now, when you've only got a black and white photo, a headshot to go on with a single expression, there's not enough information for you to actually create any real accurate understanding of where somebody's positioned in terms of threat level. So you start looking for other things. You maybe notice the way they're dressed, or how combed their hair is, or whether they bothered shaving, or they plucked their eyebrows. You're looking for every tiny little detail. But very quickly, almost instantly, you form an opinion. You look at the photo and you decide whether you like this person or not, whether you would give them the time, or whether you might just back off and run away. But when you're given another piece of information, such as the name of a well-loved book, it causes you that extra bit of information is either going to reinforce your first opinion, or it's going to completely challenge your first opinion. And that I found fascinating as well. Now, little side issue, the reason I talked about a well-loved book, initially I started thinking about the notion of, well, do I say to people, what's your favourite book? Or do I say something like, what book are you currently reading? And then I remembered that there's a fascinating thing. If you've ever heard of Desert Island Discs, if you're not from the UK and you don't listen to Radio 4, you might not have. But basically, it's a program, a radio program, which has been going on for decades and decades and decades, where the idea is it's an interview. The interviewer talks to this person, and during the course of it, they select 8 records that, if they were stranded on a desert island, these would be the ones that they would like to have with them. And at the end of it, they also say, if you could have a book, what book would you take with you? But from fairly early on, they then started saying, you're given the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare. Therefore, what other book would you take? Because basically, so many people have said, I would take the Bible, I would take the complete works of Shakespeare. And whether they would or not is sort of kind of beside the point. The fact is, people wanted to be seen as that's what they would take. So I knew that if I said tell me what book you're currently reading, or what's your favourite book, people would come up with something noble. Some people would come up with something interesting, something very literary, something very highbrow, because everybody's trying to impress. So it would all be Dostoevsky or whatever. But if I said, give me the name of a well-loved book, well, then that let people off the hook. Suddenly they could talk about a book they love from childhood or from their teenagehood, or one that they just read last week which blew them away and they were still really excited about. So with that in mind then, that became really interesting. And sometimes what would happen is, when you looked at these photos on the wall, and then you formed your opinion, and then you looked at the title underneath that they'd chosen. And like I say, sometimes it would reinforce. So, this person's chosen The Hobbit, and you look at them and you go, he even looks a bit like a hobbit. Somehow it doesn't surprise me. It reinforces that kind of homely nature to the face of the person that I saw. And sometimes it flipped it on its head. You know, you might see, this kind of really big, moody biker type guy, but his favourite book is Black Beauty, children's story about a horse. And you go, oh, well, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Or you've got a warm, friendly, petite-looking woman whose favourite book is, or well-loved book is Bravo 20, which is about the SAS, Special Air Services, Army. It's a kind of strong army thing. And you think, wow, okay, well, I wasn't expecting that either. And that new piece of information causes you to look again at the photo and reinterpret it. And that was really what the idea was behind this artist in residency was about. It was about taking the concept of how we prejudge an image, and then what you can do to either reinforce or flip that judgment. There was also another thing, that by having all these photos next to each other, you couldn't look at one photo without being aware of the other ones in your peripheral vision. And because nobody was smiling, when you walked into the room, especially towards the end of the week and a lot of the walls were full, you stepped into a room where there was, I think I took in the end about 173 photos. And so there's 173 pairs of eyes all staring at you. And for some people that made them feel very uncomfortable. And there was no doubt there were some people who, they walked in, sort of looked around and then sort of backed back out. It clearly freaked them out, whereas others kind of dived in and found it particularly interesting. So what I'll do, I think I will, I'll just take you through a few photos, give you a little sense of what was going on. So if I flick here, here's a little photo. I mean, none of these photos were edited, these particular ones. A little photo of Wigtown, Main Street, or the square, which is more of a triangle. More cars than usual because this is on the event. But what you can see is it's a small Scottish town. It's not skyscrapers, it's not city, it's not even large town or medium-sized town. There's plenty of places where it would be called a village. But this is Wigtown. Here's another. I'll come back to that bookshop. I'll come back to again in a minute. But a lovely old Georgia building. But you can see the kind of buildings that are going on now. One of the buildings was a cafe, Reading Lasses, and the studio space I was given was in what was called the Hut, which was actually part of an old telephone exchange from several decades back. Was now used for storing books, and there was a room in it which was sometimes given over to community groups to do things. So I was given that space for the residency. So if you look down to the right here, you can see there's a little door that says the Hut, and there's a little door. It looks like it just goes into the building, but it doesn't. There's actually sort of goes down the side. So if I go on to there, what you can see now with the door to the Hut open, you can see that there's actually a pathway goes through next to this building. Okay, where's that gone? And then if you went down the path, this is what it looked like. And there's a door open at the end. This is the Hut, this large wooden building here. The venue stuck on there, so if you happen to glance down the thing, you'd hopefully see it. So you could walk down there, and then when you got to the end and you turned around, this was your view. So you come down the path on your left here. Gates, you can then turn, you walk into here, you see there's plenty of books stored. You then walked back up roughly to where this window is here, and you came into this room. So this room was then, there were boards put up so that I could start, as you can see here, this was after day one where I'd started pinning some of these pictures to the walls. Now, so what I'd done was I set up, and I had I had a table which had leaflets and flyers about what it was all about, model release forms, information so that people knew that what they were letting themselves in for, that the photos would be used for publicity and put into a book and things like that, and they just had to sign and say that they were okay with that. Over here on the right you can see the setup. So what I've got is I've got a light, I've got a window, and I've got a reflector. That's just and I've got a little backdrop. So if I flick over here, so we've now come from that door, which was the perspective before, we've now come over to where the seat was, and what you can see is we've got a backdrop, a stool, a single light, and a reflector. And I got people to sit on the stool, lit from one side, a little bit of bounce light coming back from the other side, just to sort of fill in the shadows. And that was the setup. And then from there, I had my camera tethered to the laptop. Again, if I go back here, you can see there's the laptop sitting there, and I could take the photo. I take 2, 3, maybe 4 photos of each person. Just trying to, the tricky thing was trying to get them not to smile, because as soon as they sat down, they automatically, it's that. But I'd explain, talk it through, and start getting the photos. So to come back then to, so that was what I was going to be doing for the week. Now, I wasn't always in the studio. I took some photos out on the street, and we'll show you a couple of photos fairly soon. But what I would also like to say here is this shop here, the bookshop, right? Now, the bookshop is in fact the largest in Scotland. It's the largest second-hand bookshop in Scotland. It feels, despite the Georgian front here, 3 windows at the top here. So, I mean, by a normal house standard, it's for around here, it's a fairly large house. But it's deceptive in the fact that it goes back for ages. There are layers and rooms and rooms and rooms and rooms, and then there's a long garden and there's extra rooms, and then you can go upstairs, and there's just books everywhere. And it really is the largest second-hand bookstore in Scotland. Interestingly, Sean, who runs it, he's even had a couple of books published himself, based around the incredibly annoying things that customers do and say when they come into the shop. If anybody's ever watched the Channel 4 TV series Black Books, you'll recognise certain traits. And in fact, some people, it sort of got to a stage whereby some people kind of feel that they haven't had the full experience until they've somehow been insulted by him on some level. But yeah, you can look that up, look up Sean as well, from the bookshop in Wigtown Book Festival, or in Wigtown. So, but to give you a sense then, if you lost that one again. That's, where are we? So you go in, you go through the shop, you've got stairwells, you've got all these books coming up here. Now, if you then went up the stairs, here's another thing where you can look down, more books and everything else. But that triple fronted window bit that we saw here was actually then used as the green room for all the guest authors. So wonderful, large room, comfy sofas, table set out, and essentially for authors who turned up and were going to be speaking, this was the place where you could come and get meals, or you could get snacks, you could have tea, coffee, or just sit quietly or engage in conversation with other people. So this was the place to be if you wanted to kind of recruit people for the project, recruit authors at any rate. So I would come up here several times a day and see, go up and chat to somebody and ask if they would tell them about the project and see if they would want to be involved. Now, sometimes they would come over to the hut, but it wasn't always convenient. Sometimes people were short of time, or just quite simply, they didn't really want to move from there. So at that point, it took a little bit of experimenting, but eventually I found that this corner over in the right, if I got them to stand just forward of this door, then I got the light coming in from the window. And so that became my sort of next favourite photography space. So let me show you a couple of photos, some of my favourites. This one, the Reverend Margaret Laurie. There was just something about this one was taken in the hut. You can tell by the dappled background that came from that green backdrop that I had. All these were going to be done in black and white. this photo always does well if I'm doing kind of wee online competitions, doing portraits and stuff like that. There is something about the look in her eyes and the life lived in the face, which is quite compelling, I think. Certainly one of my favourites. Now this one was great. This is an actress, comedian, Elaine C. Smith. If you live in Scotland, or you know anything about Scottish television, she's a bit of a legend, a well-known actress. And she'd been giving a talk, and I'd managed to find her up in the green room, but she said, look, you know, I've got to go into give a talk, can't do anything, and then she was going to be running off, but she agreed to sort of immediately after the talk to come and get the photo taken. So I had to make sure I was there at the venue when she finished, go up, remind her, and then as we walked across to the hut, we were chatting away, and she was absolutely brilliant. It just anecdote after anecdote, warm, friendly, laughing, joyous, fantastic company to be in. She really was. And then what was so brilliant was, you know, she sat down and she said, well, okay, what kind of face do you want? And I said, well, okay, you know, I'm not looking for the serious face. I said, well, okay, give me a kind of look where, you know, one of your kids or something or your husband's about to step into the house with our muddy wellies on, and you're going to stop them with a look. And in that, so she turns and she just gives me this fantastic glare straight down the lens. And I go click. And then 2 seconds later, burst out laughing. And since then, I've kind of often used, if not this photo, then certainly talking about the idea with this photo, to put across the notion that people will often talk about photography as somehow capturing the essence of a person, as though we only have one essence, as though there is only one side to us. We are multiple complex people, and the idea that you can sum up an entire person in one photo, quite frankly, is bollocks. It's not realistic. It's like thinking you can sum up a whole opera in a single note. Any note in a piece of music only really makes any sense if you know the notes that came before it, the note that comes after it, and the notes that are running alongside it. Similarly, we are multiple complex people. In order to get to understand a person, you have to know them in more than one mood, and you have to know them in more than one snapshot, because you have no idea whether that moment is truly representative of who they are, or even of whether it's truly representative of who they were in that moment. And this was what I loved about this, is Elaine C. Smith, if you meet her, is warm. Now, she probably does have this look for stopping somebody walking into her house with muddy wellies, because she's certainly able to conjure it. But was this representative of who she was at the time? Absolutely not. She played it for the camera, gave me a wonderful photo for the wall. This Kirsten. Now, Kirsten, I wonder if you're watching. Kirsten has, in fact, I've not seen her comment here, but she has watched some of these podcasts. Back in the early days when I was doing that, actually submitted 1 or 2 photos for a little bit of feedback. But this was out on the street. I really quite like this one. I just wanted to sort of show that actually, you know, I wasn't always indoors. Now, we didn't do many photos outside, and trying to get the light right was always an absolute nightmare. But I did do a couple of shots on the street, which were quite fun. This one, Peggy was great. Peggy, another really warm, friendly, lively, vibrant, energetic person. And she, and I loved her glasses as well, real kind of strong characteristic. And this one was taken then up in the green room, as I said, with that door in the background, the curtains, and it's purely got the daylight coming through the window for it. But I love this moody black and white feel. This one, same place, Robin Yassin Kassab, Syrian English writer, really friendly guy. What you don't see in here is his incredibly powerful, striking blue eyes. But it was another example of people just giving me these wonderful, intense looks into the camera that I was asking for. And slowly, like I say, I built up around the room. But then there were a couple of other examples which were really fun as well. Adriana came in, and she'd come through from reading Lass's Cafe at the front, and she had a slice of chocolate cake with her. And so she put it down. I said, no, pick it up. Let's take a photo of you actually holding it. And so that I love this one. Just that this sort of started to feel like something different. This was more than just a portrait. This was a portrait with something as well. There's now an object in there. And that sort of adds a slightly new layer of story to it, which I thought was really quite interesting as well. And so that was fun. And then the last photo I want to show you from this collection of portraits was Carol. Carol came in, and she was a little bit nervous, and wasn't really sure about having her photo taken, but she wanted to take part, and so she sat down, and I took her photo, and the photo was fine. She gave me a nice kind of serious look and all the rest of it. But while we were chatting, I said to her, I said, what I would really love, I said, is just for somebody to sort of stick on some lipstick and smear it across the side of their face or something. Anyway, so we had a little bit of a laugh, and she left. And 15 minutes later, she came back in with a little purse and a stick of lipstick. I said, "Go on then, let's do it. Let's just give this one a go." And she did this. Dabbed a little bit of mascara under the eyes, got the lipstick out, went. Fantastic. I just loved it. And she's going, she said, I've got no idea what got into me. She said, I would never have my photo taken normal. I just wouldn't even have a photo taken, let alone do something like this. I still never fully figured out. I don't know whether it's because of the setup, whether it kind of felt like she felt like it gave her permission to let go a bit. She certainly thought her husband would never believe her that she'd actually done this. But I love this. I love this photo. I love the fact that she was prepared to do that. And this is all before I started doing the narrative shoots. At this point, I was still very much, black and white, moody black and white portraiture was my thing. But in a way, this and like the Adriana eating the cake became the starting point, the seed planting for really sort of, what might people do? Where could we take this? Could we start doing more interesting photos that go beyond just the portrait? I probably didn't fully grasp it at the time, but certainly seeds were being planted. This then just another setup. This is sort of by the end of the time. You can now see there's photos here. In fact, actually, you can now see that's that one of Robin that I was talking about. We've got them coming around here. They're then coming around behind me. They've gone right round the room. They're now actually up to the point whereby they're sort of starting to almost intrude into the photo space itself. And then this was taken right at the end when I put all of them all up. And basically what I've done is I've taken about half a dozen photos around the room and just stitched them together. So the scale obviously looks wrong because the walls are curved. But what you can see here though is we've got the laptop with the pictures. I've taken down the lights now, but we've got all these pictures going right around the walls. And this was, so that was it. That was the end of the Wigtown, my time there. It was an incredible experience and a real learning experience for me, and it led on to other things. At some point in the future, I will probably talk about the following year for this, where I did a whole set of photos along the theme of authors as characters from literature, where authors who were coming to give readings got to choose a character that they, from a book, or whether they were a famous author like H.G. Wells or a character like the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland or whatever, and they could choose a character, and then I would take a photo of them as that character. And that's really what kick-started my whole narrative photography. So Wigtown Book Festival really played a major part in the development of my photography. And like I say, it's on this week now, and because it's online, you can go there. There are loads of authors being interviewed, and it's free. Most of them are, I think pretty much everything there is free. There might be one or two pay for things, but most of them are. You can go, you can reserve tickets, watch the interviews live. I think they're being recorded and then being left up for a few days. So if there's somebody you missed, you can track them down as well. Amazing event. I really would recommend it. So it's Wigtown Book Festival. Type that into Google, type it into YouTube, type it into Facebook, and you'll be able to, then find the bits that will lead you on to where you would like to go to next. So that's Wigtown Book Festival, and and that the opportunity, I think for me, I was enjoying doing portraits, taking photos of faces, and this was a chance to just do it on a scale unimaginable to me at the time. Right, well, I hope you found that interesting. Well, let's flip through and I guess let's see. I'll just close those windows there and see if we have any more comments. Okay, got a few more comments here. Looks like Stacy says, reminds me of our art festivals. Maggie, great photos still, Kim. Oh, thank you. And Paul says, there is something about mono portraits. Yeah, I mean, I started off doing black and white portraits, and I still have a love for doing black and white portraits. And yeah, kind of missing doing some more of them. Under lockdown conditions, it's not something I can do. I mean, I do still enjoy doing any kind of photography is difficult now under lockdown conditions. I mean, I still do enjoy doing all the big set pieces, but there is something very intimate and personal and special when you're just doing a headshot. It's just you and that person, and the relationship between the two of you through the lens. And again, I think the times when, sometimes I have to do photos where, of course, they've come to me, they need a photo for their profile, for their business, where they need to look warm and friendly and they need to be smiling and what have you, and that's fine. But the ones I love best, the ones I always love the best, is where you can not do the smile and you can go into character. It always becomes much more interesting, and I think it becomes more interesting in the psyche. It's not just what I like looking at; it's what it allows other people to do. If you're in front of the camera, but you're being allowed not to smile, you're being allowed to explore other emotions and ideas. It's back to playing in the dressing up box. You get to be characters. You get to explore other parts of your psyche, or just have fun pretending you're someone else. Yeah. If you can, find somebody to take photos of who will play. Or, for that matter, if you can't find anybody else, start doing some selfies, but play. Put on different expressions. Play with different characters. And I think you'll find that there's a whole world out there. I mean, especially if you're the kind of person who doesn't normally photograph people, if you're landscapes, wildlife, macro, buildings, street photography, to get in and play up close with faces, for me, there's no end of fascination. So I think it's certainly worth doing. Okay. If you found that interesting, again, if you would like to support these podcasts, then do go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can help contribute towards the podcasts. So, what I want to talk about now then is let's get on to the critique section. So critique is, this bit is for to allow people to submit images to get feedback and pointers as to what might be useful to help advance our photography. We all have blind spots with our own photos. We take a shot and, you know, we look at it and we think it's great and nobody else does, or we take a photo and we know we were trying to capture something but we just couldn't quite get it, and an extra pair of eyes, somebody who kind of has a bit of a knowledge of what they're doing, can be extraordinarily useful. But it's also very difficult to get hold of, because most people, when we show them a photo, will tend to be complimentary because they don't want to hurt our feelings, they don't want to cause any arguments. So they'll tend to tell us what they think we want to hear rather than actually what's useful. So for this, if you find this interesting and you've not already done so, join the Facebook group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and then you can submit your images, and at the next podcast I can take a look through them and give you some live feedback, as I'm about to do now. Right, okay. Where are we going to start? Let's start with Stacey. So, Stacey has sent me this picture and says, is this boring? Lone tall tree against a beautiful blue sky. Took this sitting so I could get the full length of the tree. So she's taken the photo of the tree, but she's not totally sure whether it's working or not. I asked her, when I looked at it, my first feeling immediately was it felt kind of oversaturated. Those blues looked just a little overdone, and the greens also a little bit overcooked. It's sort of gone beyond looking natural. So I did ask her to send me the original, and she sent me this as the original photo. So let's open this with Photoshop, because I mean, I think there's, first of all, there's sort of slightly better ways that maybe you can. It is a tricky one. The first thing that strikes me is that it has been overexposed, and you can tell that it's been overexposed because basically it's all whited out behind. The trees looks quite pale. Now I don't know whether you had it on auto exposure. If you did, it's possible that the camera sort of focused on a darker part of the tree or the darker part of the foreground, and decided to just auto expose for that, and then sort of blew out the highlights a bit. So it does need to be darkened somewhat. So I'll just drop this into Camera Raw, where I have more options for kind of quick adjustments. If I click auto, well, that darkens it very much and also gives that strong blue. Let's just take the highlights down, maybe bring the exposure down a little bit. Shadows up, getting a bit of banding there, but okay, I'm not going to worry too much just at the moment. It does feel a bit overexposed. Take the saturation down a little bit. The other thing I noticed with this is it's not actually, it's a little bit blurry here. It's not fully in focus with this. Now I'm just trying to think. You've got this at 100th of a second. It strikes me that it's possible with this, Stacey, that maybe that wasn't a fast enough shutter speed for your wobble of your hand. It's not quite as sharp as you would expect it to be. But anyway, let's go back to here. If I sharpen that up a little bit, add a little bit more texture, a little bit more clarity, and maybe, we're sort of getting to that. But in essence, your main problem here, Stacey, is the fact that it was overexposed to begin with. I'll take that vibrance down a little bit there. So that gives a sort of slightly better, it's still a very strong blue that I'm not overly keen on. I mean, another option here, of course, is that you could put it in black and white, which, plays then a bit more with the shape of it. But there's another thing here, really, which is the bit where, where you were talking about, what you were trying to do was capture the full length of the tree. And you say you're sitting down in order to get it. I wonder, was there a building or something behind you that stopped you being able to step back further? Because really what I tend to feel with this is that it needs a little bit more room to breathe. And let me show you. Basically, I will use the content aware bit. If I grab this corner and I drag that up a little bit, maybe even drag that out a little bit like that, and then hit enter. Now this will just do an autofill just to give you a rough sense of what it might have looked like if you managed to sort of stand about an extra 3 or 4 feet back. And I think when you've got something like that, that now gives you a better sense of the tree. I mean, to get the height, you know, what does help is that you've got the buildings, you know, these buildings down at low level. You've gone to a low level and you're looking up, but those trees and in the background and the buildings in the background, because they're all low down, do help to give you that sense of height. But without that sort of more space to breathe, I think it just kind of felt too closed in. And it's a common kind of problem that we have, that when we photograph something, we are looking at something and we are concentrating on the thing we are photographing. But what we also have to think about is the context in which we're photographing it. And this tree is in a field with a large sky behind it. And I think just giving a little bit more sense of that large sky actually helps that tree, helps, you know, give a bit more feeling to it rather than it kind of just feeling squashed in. So I hope that helps, Stacey. Give you a, you know, so the main thing for that is, one, could you have stood further back? Which I think would have helped give more space. The other thing, make sure that you have got the settings on your camera such that it's not going to be out of focus. I mean, fine, at web level you can't really tell, but if you went to print this up, you would notice that it was blurred where, you know, down on that bark, because the fact is, I mean, there's some interesting bark shapes here. You know, you could just as easily sort of go in and have a little bit of fun with that. I think this house, I kind of wonder almost as well whether if you'd moved round to your left a little bit, so that these houses down here weren't directly, you know, we're just more kind of on the edge rather than kind of interfering with it. That might have given a bit more sense of the space of the field, because the other houses over on the right are clearly further away. So that might have, so yeah, moving around a little bit to the left, moving back a little bit further, making sure it's in sharp focus, but then also making sure that you're not overexposing. And then I think at that point you would manage to sort of get the interesting bits of this, which is you've got the height of the tree, but beyond, you know, as well as that, there is the fact that you've got this the split part of the wood here and another bit splitting off here. So it's the broken nature of the tree is kind of what makes it interesting, you know, in itself. So hope that helps, Stacey. Let's close that and right. Well, just check here. Stacey says, I honestly did not do auto. It was on manual. I couldn't see with sunlight in my direction. Yeah, well, that's always a tricky one as well if you're, you know, doing it outside. But here's the thing: if you can see in the back, if it is, you know, do check that it's not overexposing. And it, I mean, quite simply with that, you had it on 100th of a second. If you'd increase that to say 160th or 200th of a second, then not only would it have counteracted any wobble you might have had with your hand, it would have also brought the exposure down a bit as well. So if you're not shooting on auto and you are shooting on manual, you do need to find a way of double checking whether the image, you know, is overexposed or not. What's that? No, but cars. All right, that'll be okay. You couldn't stand back because it wasn't there was a building in the way, but there were cars in the way. Yeah, I kind of understand that. But you know, maybe like I say, if you'd moved around to your left a little bit, that might have helped. So okay, great. Hope that helps. Right. So let's move on. What are we going to talk about now? VG, she didn't actually put these into critique, but did send me the images. I won't go through all of them. I mean, basically, what happened is VG's been playing around with a chess set, and she got a reflector as well to get some light and bounce some back. So what I'll do, I'll take one photo here and I'll pull in on this. Because there's a couple of things that I would like to talk about with this. So what we've got here is we've got an f9, which is quite a deep depth of focus, 50mm. Okay, so I guess you're using the 50mm lens. I don't know how much, I don't think you've cropped in too far. I think if you've gone for a slightly shallower depth of focus, maybe if you've gone for something like an f5.6 or an f3.2 even, might have been quite interesting for just capturing this particular night. I mean, you've got this night here and some of the others are blurred, but I think if you'd done an even shallower depth of field, if you'd got a wider aperture would have given you a shallower depth of field, which would have blurred all the rest of it a little bit more. I think that could have been quite interesting. And I'm guessing this top bit in the right corner here, that's probably the reflector coming back. What you said was, I tried taking some photos, not satisfactory, so hesitant to submit for the critique section. The reflector got delivered today when I was taking the photos, so I used the golden one. Yep, so what we've got here is the gold light coming back. Okay, first thing with this is, I mean, quite simply, I'm just going to play with the crop because we've got this dead center and we've got a lot of space up the top here, which isn't really doing much. And I think with this, we go, pretty much classic rule of thirds. So I'll grab this corner, drag it down here, and if we do something roughly like this, then I think that immediately makes it, I'll just maybe pull that in a little bit there. That immediately, I think, gives us a sort of better balance of photo from that to that. We're now drawn into this, and the rest, the bit which isn't the night, which is the other pieces, are now forming part of the background. They're out of focus, which is great because you want the focused bit being on the night because that's the part of it. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can go with this, and one obvious one is you can go black and white. That's quite simply a gradient map. That horse now looks a little bit dark, so maybe if I took the curves and drag that up a bit, drag that down a little, create a little bit more contrast, maybe something like, be careful about blowing out the highlights of the white pieces, something like that maybe, and perhaps maybe lightening up part of this side as well. So just take this one out, shadows a little bit. And there, I think, that's one kind of quick thing that you can do. However, what I really wanted to talk about, what was kind of grabbing me here, was the fact is you've got the golds and the browns of the chess set, these wonderful wooden figures. You've also used the gold. You've got the light, I'm guessing probably coming from the window, but you've got a reflector there, putting a golden light onto it. And here what I want to talk a little bit about is the use of colour and colour balance. So the thing is with this is everything is full browny yellow, gold, shit. But I think if you really want to make the most of this, what you actually need to do is you need a contrasting colour to kind of come in against it. And to show you what I mean, so, and if you like on your colour wheel, if you're going opposite yellowy orange, you're really moving into the blue side of things. So let me show you something else here, VG, which I think you might find quite interesting. I'll just duplicate that layer. Take this into Camera Raw Filter. And up at the top here, we've got the white balance. And if I shove that as auto, you can see it creates a blue. But okay, let's just straightforwardly here, with a white balance, you can take you've got a green-purple slider. That doesn't do anything for it. But you've got the yellow-blue slider. Now, if you can take it yellow, you can make it even more yellow. That's where we were. But what I want to do is I want to nudge this over. You see what happens here if I nudge it over into the blue. Now, if I take it too far, everything ends up with a blue shift that we don't want, and we've lost that yellow. But sort of from there, sort of somewhere around about here, I think, we're just starting to move from the neutrals into a blue background here. And I think that then becomes a little bit more interesting. And then if at this point we add a little bit of vignette to sort of draw a little bit more attention to the front, and maybe, you know, take the clarity up a little bit, play with the texture a touch, something like that. And do you see the difference there, VG? That from that to that, I think it now, you know, you've still got your piece here, but the pieces, all the pieces on the board now stand out much more, I think, from the background. Having that sort of slight bluish tint, I think, then suddenly makes quite a bit of difference to it. So I hope you find that useful. It's again, you know, we've talked a lot over the months about, you know, getting the focus right, getting the bokeh right, getting the lighting right, and and I love. I mean, I have to say, I love the lighting in this. I love the fact that you've got the light coming from the side, and it's capturing and again creating texture and depth. The fact that the pieces in the foreground and the background are out of focus, and the only bit that's in focus is in the middle, is great, because that creates layers of depth. But also having the light coming from the side rather than the front, likewise, adds the shadows in, which gives us that three-dimensional set. So even though it's just, and this is the whole thing about photography is a two-dimensional medium where we are trying to trick the eye into believing it's three-dimensional. And, you know, I love the way that you're starting to get the hang of that. You've got an eye for this, Fiji, and it's developing, and it's really lovely to see. So yeah, but you know, another layer to start thinking about. We can move into it slowly, but is the notion of colour and colour balance. And if you've got these beautiful carved wooden pieces, but when it's all yellow, you kind of miss a trick. By bringing in a kind of slightly bluish cast to the background, then it actually makes the yellow look even more yellow, in a way, or the wood look even more wood-like. I think it just stands out a bit more. So, hope you found that interesting and useful. Right, okay, let's close that. Any more comments? Prasad, hi, glad you could make it along. Nice explanations. Good, I'm glad that's useful. And Stacey's coming in and saying that's helpful too. Well, that's great, Stacey, glad that it is. Right, okay, couple more to play with. Where will I go next? Right, let's Paul. Okay, Paul, hope you're still about. Now, what we have with Paul, let's minimize that. Open this, and so Paul sent me this photo and said, this is an image of nearby Sandy Hills Beach. I like the minimalist quality, but have never been able to process it to show the ethereal light as I would like. Any suggestions welcome. Now, and then what Paul did do as well, which was extraordinarily useful, is to send me the original as well. So let's just I'll come back to that. So slightly not quite. Let me open that with Photoshop and take off the settings that I was. Let's go back to normal. Right. Okay. So this is the photo as it sort of turned up if you were using the JPEG version of it. Now, first of all, to talk about the notion of Sandy Hills. Sandy Hills is a place in southwest Scotland, down on the coast, where when the tide goes out, it goes woomph, it goes far out, and you've got all the, this big expanse, and there's some posts and poles, and there's this wooden structure in the distance, which not quite detailed enough to be able to read the writing on it. Probably says danger of some kind. But what's interesting about this is the shape of Scotland. If you're looking at Scotland and as you come up England and you cross over the border, you've got this chunk on the left that kind of overhangs, and that's southwest Scotland. That's where I'm based. Further over there, that's Wigtown, which we were talking about earlier. Sandy Hills is coming back towards England a little bit. Now, just across from that, you've got a bulge that comes out, which is Cumbria and the Lake District. And so when you're in southwest Scotland and you're looking south, out across the Solway Firth, you get the Cumbrian Hills in the background. And in this photo, I've got to zoom right in and you can very, very faintly see this. Now, if I go over to Paul's edited photo, you can see them a bit more clearly. So it's one of those features of Sandy Hills that you go down, and when the tide goes out, you've got all this sort of sand, little bits of light. As the sun's out, it's glistening off the sand. You've got the Cumbrian Hills in the distance, and it's nearly always a breeze. In fact, actually, I think somewhere over there in Lost in the Mist, you can also probably, if you're looking at the right angle, you can see a whole wind farm. That's an offshore wind farm there as well. And there are the smells and the feel of the breeze on your skin and the light quality. And it does, because you've got this huge sky and you've got the light reflecting off the watery sand, the light is bouncing about all over the place. And it really is ethereal. It's a bit otherworldly. And so Paul's standing there, having all these experiences, pulls out the camera to try and capture some of what's going on. And then the photo doesn't really do justice to it. And it is one of these seriously tricky things to do. Now, what's happened here is, because of the direction where Paul's taken the photo, like I say, there is this structure here. And so to try and give it some reference point, Paul has included the structure. Now, what I also noticed you've done, Paul, is take out these posts. You obviously felt that they were kind of distracting. Now, I will say I've spent a while playing with this, moving sliders left, right and centre, cropping, recropping. And the thing is I don't think you're necessarily going to be able to get the feeling you want from this photo. You can play with it, you can, improve it bits, and you have. I mean, that notion that what you've done is you've gone rule of thirds, you've in this photo, this structure is in the middle and the horizon line is in the middle. And, so, I mean, if we do this, so we take this up, we place the horizon line at the thirds edge. I might need to tilt that. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's tilt this first, because that horizon is just part of a degree off, and my OCD with it. So yeah, first of all, let's do that. So I've got a straight horizon. I always feel happier when I've got a straight horizon. And then, yes, now there's a number of different ways you can go rule of thirds. If we place that in the third there, which is kind of where you've done it, or you can place it there, so that it's in the upper left third. And then that makes much more of a feature of the beach and the puddles and, the texture down on the sands. You can just as easily, now if you go this way round, whether it's sand or sky, at this point then you are able to bring much more of the hills into the picture. But I think with all of this, now, I mean, okay, let's go back here. Let's do a quick edit to bring out the hills a little bit. Part of the problem here, in essence, Paul, is that it's overexposed, so that it's very, whilst there are hills here, and I know you would see them really clearly with the eyes, they're lost. I mean, we've really got to sort of drag the wrong one. That's a contrast. Drag the exposure down, we can start seeing them a little bit more clearly. Drag the highlights. Let's drag the highlights right down. Highlights and the exposure, and now we can see the hills a little bit more clearly. That's good, except for the fact that we've now kind of lost it with everything else. So there's definitely an exposure problem here, and trying to correct that becomes more difficult. Ethereal quality, I think you really bring down the contrast as well, actually. Maybe make it less contrasty. Although you can then up the clarity. Yeah, obviously I must admit, it kind of kept having me feeling I was struggling with it. But then what I kind of started to feel was the big problem here is what you're focusing on. Because what you talk about in the bit you sent me was, I like the minimalist quality, but I've never been able to process it to show the ethereal light as I would like. And what we're talking about, just as I said when I was introducing about this beach, is it's the light quality. And it's the expanse, it's that sense of expanse that you have there. But the problem is if you just take a photo of the expanse without any reference point, it doesn't really show up. We've talked plenty of times before, and I know you know this, Paul, which is you need some kind of something to anchor it against. If you're going to have something, a bit like Stacey's tree, the tree works better if you can see the small buildings in the distance, because it then gives you a better sense of size. If you're wanting to have something big, then you need something to hook it against. But the problem is that what you're hooking this expanse against is this structure here. And this structure isn't interesting enough, really. Now, or rather, if it is interesting, if that is the structure, if that's what it's really about, then you need to be close up to it. What you're talking about then is having a picture like this, right? Where, you've now got the structure taking up, do that rule of thirds here or something like that. And now we've got the layers of hills in the background, and we've got the structure in the foreground. But of course you would have zoomed in at this point. You would have needed probably something like a 200-300mm lens or whatever to be able to take that kind of shot. And then what you're doing is you're saying, well, what's the story of the structure? And the story of the structure is its position within the water and the Solway, but those hills behind it. Another way, if you were going to play around with that structure as well, would be to actually go portrait, bookmark almost, where you're doing something like this, where, okay, let's just sort of, now you can either, again, make it sand based or hill or sky based, but essentially here then, by bringing it in, you're then allowing for the layers to come in much more. We've got, down here we've got wet sand, shaley white, lighter sand, again layers, more shiny bits. Then we've got the structure, then we've got the hills, then we've got clouds and sky and what have you. So if you're wanting to have that layers, then the layers, because they stack up in that direction, become more emphasized by actually cropping it in that way. But what we still come back to, I think, is if it's about the space, that's not really enough to anchor it on. And part of the problem as well with it is that it's mid-range. It's sort of in the middle of the photo. And really, I can't be absolutely sure because I'm not there to try it out. But my guess is what you really need is something right in the foreground, Paul. That actually, if supposing just down in this bottom left bit here or something, you had a large piece of driftwood, like one of those tree trunks that sometimes sort of find their way onto the things. If you'd had one of the sand tractors or something sort of running across, just coming, or somebody walking sort of about, just off to the right here, but that kind of thing, but not so far. I really think you need something in the foreground to anchor the sense of everything that's going on in the background. Now, of course, you would run into the danger of the fact that then the attention would get drawn into the foreground. But the other alternative is birds. Is really you want the silhouette of the birds in the sky to give the sky a context. So you're either needing something sort of down on the sand, which is giving the sense of the beach the context, or you're needing something up in the sky to give the sky a sense of context. And part of your decision is, are you what's the story? Is the story primarily about the emptiness of the beach with the tide going out, or is the story about the expanse of sky with the line of hills in the background? And I think once you start thinking along these lines, Paul, I think then that makes it maybe slightly easier for next time you go back to Sandy Hills to start experimenting around and saying, well, what's important here? What am I really trying to grab? Because what this photo shows me is that it's a kind of, well, I'll grab something here and work it out afterwards. Because everything is centre aligned, the beach and the sky occupy the same amount of space, and that structure is smack bang in the middle. You've taken the photo of that with an idea of, I'll work out how to structure it afterwards. You haven't structured it in camera, which indicates to me that at that point you weren't sure what it was you were going for. And the problem is when you've got back, you've then the reason you struggled is because you haven't actually, that photo then isn't doing it because it isn't, because you haven't been clear what you wanted, so you didn't get the right raw material to give you what you wanted. It's that notion of, sometimes often only when we're sitting at the computer do we come to understand the photo we should have taken rather than the one that we've got. And to be honest, I think that this is one of those cases here, that if it was about that structure in the middle, you needed to be zoomed in and much closer to that structure. If it was about the beach, you needed something else to anchor in the beach, something a bit more in the foreground. And if it was about the sky and the hills in a distance, you probably needed to have some kind of birds flying or something, or somebody flying a kite even would be rather nice. Send Alison out with a kite next time. I'm sure she'd love it. But then that would have given you a different kind of context. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you sort of a place to start, to play with the thought process before you next go back to Sandy Hills. And when you do next go back, if you take any of these ideas in mind, let me know as well. That's always good. Right. So. Hope that helped. What's that? Oh, Maggie said bookmark works really well. Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, I quite liked that look as well. Okay. So, final photo I want to talk about is Jackie. So this one is the one that Jackie says, I've submitted another one of my favourite images, which always tends to bomb on me. And sorry, just get rid of those ones. Pause. I would love your opinion or input. The unedited one is at the bottom, hence the crop, seeing as I was struggling with the harsh light. Okay, so first of all, let's just let's flip back across and let people know what it is we're talking about. So, this is Jackie's photo, which Jackie is really happy with, but she says it tends to bomb. It never quite gets the response that she wants from it. So, and then, yeah, she sent me the original. So if I open that in Photoshop, you can see this. Here we've got the original. And she says, I was struggling with the harsh light on that day, so I decided to change the image to black and white, put a vignette around the street musician. I appreciate a second opinion as to where I went wrong. Well, I can understand why you've kind of done the crop you have, Jackie, given the fact that, from here, yes, the first thing, you've got a great big chunk of white here, which isn't doing anything. You've got these legs in the background and a bright, colourful material, which is grabbing the attention away from the point of the picture, which is the musician. However, beyond that, I think there's a couple of other difficulties. So, first of all, let's come in here. Let's crop this, kind of similar to what you did here. Did there with your previous one, and I will just I'll just get rid of that little corner there, that little blob there, and yeah, that'll do. Okay, so we're not being distracted by the bright coloured material on the left. So we've got this as our rough sort of shape of what we're going to play with. Now, for me, there are two initial problems with this. The first is actually the angle you've taken it at. You're taking from slightly above. And to be honest, this isn't really the angle we tend to see musicians at. We're more used to seeing musicians up on stage or on a level with us. We don't tend to look down at musicians very often. I mean, some street musicians, sit and playing drums or hang drums or something, and they're, tapping away, and we're looking down and might throw them a few pennies. But by and large, if we're watching a musical performance, very often they're on stage. They're sort of slightly elevated, and I think there's a notion of we kind of want to look up. We're being entertained by musicians. They are performing for us. We want to sort of sit back, just like in a cinema. You sit back, you've got the big screen there in front of you, or you're at a concert and there's a stage and you sit back and it's there and it's woof and it's bigger than you are. I think that's really a kind of thing, that you are in the presence of something bigger than you, and that kind of contributes to the awesomeness of it. And you can get that even with a single musician, because they are entertaining you with their skill, with their playing, and the transfer of the emotion and the mood of whatever it is, the song, whether it's bright and cheerful or whether it's moody and melancholic. But when we're kind of above them, there's I don't know, there's just something about it which immediately feels slightly wrong. And I think essentially, if you sort of sat on the ground and taken this photo, that would have immediately given you a slightly better thing. However, at that point, we also worry about other things coming into play in the background. So I appreciate that, but that's a starting point. The next bit that really, where I think it kind of plays against you here, Jackie, is that microphone. There's a notion of, I've talked in earlier episodes, and it's a while since I last talked about it, so it's worth talking about again, which is leading lines. And when you are looking at a person, the first thing we want to look at is the eyes. Our brains are hardwired to look at eyes first, because it's the eyes will tell us whether the eyes are, whether they're looking at us, whether they've noticed us, whether if they're a threat, they're going to do us damage and we better start running, or we better, going back to these primal levels evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, our brains have evolved to notice the eyes first. And with photography, if you have got other things in the background or foreground which are creating strong lines, if you can get a strong line towards the eyes, the whole picture tends to feel a little bit more comfortable. Well, when the line is missing the eyes, it somehow kind of doesn't feel right. So we've got this line here, this strong line of, let's just not done this for a little while, but this strong line of the microphone is coming up here, but it's pointing to the middle of the head. It's not going towards the eyes, which is kind of where we want it. So let me show you what I mean by this. So I'll just duplicate that layer. Now this is going to be very rough, but it doesn't matter. It's to give you a sense of what's going on. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to crop out. I'll copy that, paste it onto a separate layer, and then back on this layer, just so you can see what I'm talking about, I'm just going to remove this. Right, okay, so microphone gone. Now place the microphone back in, and watch what happens if I move this microphone. Now, okay, I will just change that to multiply, or darken will do, yep. There we go. And so now, okay, let's aware of that little gap at the end here, so I'll just stretch that out a little bit there. There we go. So let's move that down maybe just a little bit further, something like that. And can you see that the difference between, where were we? You know, okay, I think, well, let's just group those two together. So it makes it easier to. So from there to there, we've now got a line kind of moving towards her eyes a bit. And maybe actually even if we angled that a little bit more, had it sort of coming from down here, I think that creates a sort of slightly better feel to it. Or maybe it's just too busy. If we don't want to do the leading lines, we remove it altogether. And maybe there's something a bit more in that. And I think maybe at this point then, Jackie, the other thing you could do is get in close. If we, let's say we, let's make a square crop of this. So that's, 21 by 21. So maybe I want to, I do want a little bit, I want to get, something like that. Maybe not square then, because I do want to get that. I don't want to miss out that instrument. But if we come in closer like this, don't be afraid to crop the top of the head off. You don't want to crop the ear, because at that point, well, let me show you. That just feels wrong when you've got the line going through the ear. But as long as the ear is not, I think we can, we can get away with that. And I think then at this point, now I think we've got something. And then if you want to go back to your, let's just select all, copy, paste, stick that up there. Let's go to camera raw filter. Let's, what happens if I hit auto? Maybe, okay, bring down some of the highlights. Let's bring down that bit. Let's stick a vignette on. To bring in those edges, as you said. But let's move it into black and white, like you said. Now we've got that. Let's create a little bit more contrast. We'll go a bit more clarity, maybe a little bit more. Maybe bring it up a little bit brighter, a little bit more clarity, something like that. And I think what we've got is, and I think that becomes a more interesting thing. So it's understanding then that what are the other objects doing? And because really the story is about the musician, the player, the expression on her face, the way she's feeling as she's playing. There's something rather nice about that, where if we go back to the original photo, it's lost by all the rest of it. And if we go to your edit, you have kind of coming closer, but this microphone just feels really, really intrusive now. I mean, initially I did think it was about maybe creating the leading lines, but actually the more I think about it, the more I think that it just kind of gets in the way, really. So, we come back to here, having removed the microphone. So keep in mind, really, it's about, it's the phrase that I sort of find I repeat most weeks, which is, where's the story? And once you understand what the story is, all the other elements within it are either contributing to or detracting from the story you're trying to tell. And although she's a singer, has got the microphone there ready to sing into, in this moment, she's not singing into it. If you're there with the photo and you're not thinking, well, I'll take the mic out later, which you shouldn't be, I would say move around and change around. I mean, just very quickly, let me show you kind of what I had in mind here. I mean, here's a photo, for example, of somebody who's singing into a microphone, performing up on stage. And at this point, they are slightly elevated on us. But here, what I'm wanting to draw your attention to is the fact that this microphone stand then becomes a prominent part of it. He's singing into it. But this strong diagonal line leads straight up to his face. And it draws your attention in. There's a nice diagonal echoed with his strap and shoulder as well. So we've got this strong diagonal going across the picture. But that, microphone stand is becoming a leading line, and then the microphone itself leading line straight into, and even in fact actually for that matter, the 3 lights in the background are also moving you all towards his face where the action is happening. So when you look at that, the first thing you do is you look straight at his face, and then you start exploring the rest of it. And that kind of feels comfortable because we're looking at a person, we go to the face, we're looking at the expression, and now we've got that bit, we can kind of have more fun. Oh, look, he's got a guitar, you know, he's nicely lit, there's these other things going on. So what's the story? And the story with your young musician here is that now, you know, there's other bits of story if you want. I mean, for example, you know, she's got the tattoos on her arms. Maybe if you wanted, you emphasize that. You know, if I get the let's just maybe get the dodge and burn tool, and if I just go into the darken down those a little bit, contrast it with a little bit of dodge, just lighten up the skin a touch so that the tattoos stand out that little touch more. So now from that to that, you can see, you know, so, you know, if you wanted to, you make a feature, you say, well, okay, actually I think the tattoo, if you don't think the tattoos are part of it, then you don't. So the story, what are the bits that are making you interested in this person? What can you do to emphasize that? What's getting in the way of you emphasizing what you're doing? And so to go back, and I think this photo, then you can see the contrast with your original one here, where now when you look at it, that microphone is just there and feels unnecessary, an unnecessary detraction. So I hope that helps, Jackie. Yeah, so gives you some ideas, and it is that thing, because I'm sure when you look at that photo, because you took it, you see the girl. You probably don't even really notice the microphone, because, and that's part of the problem. When we're there, we're taking the photo, there's something we're looking at, but when we come to editing the photo, you have to be as clear as you can about what is it that's special about this photo. What's the story? What is it that attracted me to take this photo in the first place? What am I wanting to communicate with it? And then, now I know that. I mean, you took out the legs of the person behind because you knew that was getting in the way. You cropped out that large expanse of white above the head because you knew that wasn't contributing. But now, you know, because you're concentrating on the face, you've kind of forgotten the microphone. So, hope that helps, Stacey. Do give me some feedback. I think you tend to watch these on the YouTube version afterwards rather than live. So do give me some feedback. Let me know. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of these bits. More comments. Paul, thanks, Kim. I will keep trying. I don't doubt it, Paul. And Brian, much better without the mic. Okay, second opinion on that one. And Sarah's come in and said hi. Hi Sarah, glad you could make it. I'm just finishing up, so don't know whether you've only come in at the end. You can always hit the rewind button and start at the beginning. Right, okay. So next week I'm going to be talking about Spring Fling. Spring Fling is an open studio event in southwest Scotland, where every year you get 90 odd artist studios open their doors to the public. Public can come round and visit the artist studios, talk with the artists, buy directly from the artists, except for this year, of course, COVID-19, just like Wigtown Book Festival, you know, it's put an end to it. Except that, again, like Wigtown Book Festival, Spring Fling have worked really hard to try and move the whole thing online. And so next week, from the 5th to the 12th of October, Spring Fling is now happening in autumn, because during spring we weren't sure what was happening, so it was all put on hold. Things were decided across the course of the summer, things being put in place to make it an autumn event. So you will be able to go to the Spring Fling website. From there you will be able to visit all sorts of studios. Quite a lot of the studios have put in extra pictures and videos, and to try and give you some kind of experience of what it's like for all the artists and creatives in this area. I've been in Spring Fling 5 or 6 times. My wife's been in it about 11 or 12 over the past sort of 14, 15 years. So, and in this spring fling, I would have been in it, had it, had COVID not been about, you would have been able to come and visit me live in my studio over the spring fling weekend. I've created a wee video talking about lighting experience, but I'm also running a workshop for spring fling, which will be a little kind of join in each evening from Thursday to Sunday next week, 8 p.m. UK time. I'm going to be setting little challenges, photography you can do from home, and then there'll be a wee Facebook group set up. You can submit your images if you want, get a little bit of feedback, and the overall, at the end of it, the photo I like best, the person who took it, I'm happy to give an hour or so's one-to-one tuition online to help answer any questions you want. So something to enter. Something you don't have to live in Southwest Scotland to do this. You can be anywhere in the world. You can enter this. But I will give you more information about this next Tuesday. So make sure you tune in for that. So spring fling next week. So if you've enjoyed this, if you found it useful, please consider a contribution to, as you can see down here on your right, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for sitting through it. Thank you for the comments, and I'll see you next week. And don't forget to go and check out everything Wigtown Book Festival has to offer. It really is worth the time. Thank you very much. Cheerio. Bye-bye.